All right. Welcome to yet another edition of Econ Salon. I'm trying to make this one regular as well. And of course, happy Diwali to all of you who are tuning in. I won't keep you for long. This is not indigenization appreciation hour, so this will not continue for an hour or anything. More like 30 minutes. So of course, today's topic is evaluating Modi's PLI schemes for manufacturing. For those who came late, PLI schemes are, of course, the performance-linked incentive schemes that have been designed for different sort of manufacturing sectors, whereby the government of India incentivizes the output of those sectors essentially. And till date, about schemes worth 2 lakh crores have been outlined for 14 different sectors, and 7 more such PLI schemes are on the anvil actually. The government of India, of course, has very lofty goals with these schemes. For instance, they intend to at least generate employment to the tune of around 6.45 million from these schemes within the next 5 years. I mean, new jobs, that is, and they expect that the total, the total output would be to the tune of 28.15 lakh crores. So those are their expectations, and they hope to meet them. Now, as far as the schemes themselves, of course, these schemes have also been a little polarizing amongst the economists of the world, given that, they are a big sort of break from the past, where the government of India said that, we won't be incentivizing any particular sector, a specific sector. We will sort of have a sector neutral industrial policy and so on and so forth. But they moved away from that, thank God, because they realized that there is no such thing as a sector neutral industrial policy. Industrial policy by its very nature is best targeted at specific sectors. And because various manufacturing sectors obviously cannot, let me put it this way. While building infrastructure, removing excessive regulation, etc., at the macro level will be useful for all industry and not just manufacturing. But in the case of manufacturing, you need to have incentives that are dovetailed to specific sectors if you want those to have any chance of working, that is. So in that sense, the PLI schemes are the right step forward. Unlike what a lot of people say, I don't think they are wrong at all. In fact, from a macro perspective, their timing could have been a little better. They could have come even earlier because, the world was already moving in a direction where manufacturing value chains were going to get more regionalized. The servicification of manufacturing has, of course, been increasing continuously. And to leverage that, you actually need to manufacture. If you want to export more services in the future, you'll have to export services that are embedded in goods or are related to the sale, purchase, and manufacture of goods. So anyway, that's a different matter. I've written a whole article on that, on why, servicification actually makes the case for concentrating on manufacturing even stronger, not less so. As far as the PLI schemes themselves are concerned, well, they were obviously the first. They can be broadly, be disaggregated or segmented into two broad heads. One is basically those which are aimed at increasing domestic strategic manufacturing capability or increasing strategic manufacturing capability in certain sectors. The one major example of this, of course, would be the PLI for advanced cell chemistry, right, which aims to set up at least 50 gigawatt hour of capacity, which aims to help the setting up of 50 gigawatt hour of capacity. And that scheme, of course, has a lot of people thought some of the requirements for qualifying for that scheme were a little stringent, but that is not real. But I don't agree with that. You see, what the scheme wants is it wants the awardee or the signee to reach at least 25% domestic value added for the mother unit in 2 years' time and 60% domestic value added by the 5th year. And in that case, both the mother unit and any downstream, integrated plant will count towards that 60% domestic value added figure. And of course, the subsidy that is given via the PLI for ACC has been capped at 20% of the ACC price, right? So that's the maximum that can be given, but higher incentives will be given for better technology. As such, the scheme is technology agnostic, right? It does not in any way indicate what kind of technology is required, except in terms of energy density and stuff like that. And it also will not give any incentives beyond 20 gigawatt hour. Now, as you know, there were 4 companies which were initially awarded earlier this year under this PLI for ACCs. That one was, of course, Reliance and Renewable Energy Limited. The other was Ola Electric Mobility Private Limited. Then there was Rajesh Exports Limited, and then there was There was that company called Hyundai Global, Power of. It had a long name. Of course, then that turned out to be a bit of an embarrassment because that company had nothing to do with Hyundai Heavy Industries really. So, and Hyundai Industries actually wrote to the government, so they were dropped. And then, of course, there were 6 other waitlisted companies, including Mahindra and Mahindra L&T, and very interestingly, 2 major battery manufacturers, right? Amara Raja and Exide. So those are all waitlisted. I think so. Sort of Mahindra is getting the Hyundai Global's slot, who have been unceremoniously dropped. So that is where we are right now with that. So I think this scheme is going to take off because the players involved, they seem to have managed to zero in on the right technology. But the problem is, because the scheme is technology agnostic, does not have any requirements in terms of, sourcing plant and machinery locally or raw materials or intermediates, it's still at some level not going to cater completely to the requirement of resilience and self-sufficiency that the scheme has actually been as the scheme has been promoted. Because yes, while as we move to electric vehicles, we will definitely be able to reduce our hydrocarbon imports to a certain degree. But you cannot substitute one kind of import with the other, which is what this scheme is supposed to eschew. But like all schemes which focus on import substitution or growing strategic manufacturing capacity, there's always this issue of, another set of imports growing as a result of that. And that is usually in the area of machine tools, basically plant and machinery and intermediates. In fact, that was the problem with overarching import substitution strategies. That is a traditional problem. It becomes a macro problem because it does hit the sort of current account balance. As you try to substitute one set of imports, you end up increasing other imports. Because basically you end up increasing imports of those things that go into producing what you're trying to substitute. So that issue is always there. But of course, these schemes are also ultimately aimed at creating very large capacity and sort of unleashing economies of scale, etc., and then of course focusing on the export market. So ACC, that is one thing. I think ACC will also require layers in the future where there is a focus on basically securing the critical material supply chain. Of course, the one good thing about ACC is one good thing, as in how the government would put it, is that ACC is sort of dovetailed with both FAME, which is of course aimed at furthering the adoption and manufacturing of hybrid and electric vehicles, as well as the PLI scheme for automotives and auto components. And that also has domestic value addition requirements. The PLI for the automotive sector, it has a 50% domestic value addition requirement. I think they recently even made a dashboard which connects directly to the ERPs of the PLI awardees, right, in the automotive sector. So that's there. So these are complementary to each other. But at the end of the day, you have to give schemes directly to the supply chain itself, as I have said several times in the past. So that is one issue. You see, what has happened is because of the three shocks that India has sort of had to deal with, the informal manufacturing sector has been very badly hit. So if you want to really boost employment, you have to again incentivize investment by basically MSMEs. Apparently that is what the government intends to do next with its new set of PLIs, which are aimed at things like textile, leather, and even toys and some other basically vaccine precursors and stuff like that. Even bicycles apparently. So let's see where that goes. But the PLI schemes have to become more layered. Just having domestic value addition requirements are not enough, because see, in terms of domestic value addition, a certain component of that will just be labor, right? PLI schemes have to be dovetailed to the aim of growing the local supply chain. So that is one thing. Then, of course, you have then, of course, a lot of people say, what about these PLI schemes? Aren't they a step backwards? Well, they're not. They don't discriminate against domestic and foreign players. You see, like the telecom products PLI, which has been introduced, it has 8 domestic and 7 foreign players who will be getting benefited by that. And also, again, in that telecom products PLI, there is this breakup between MSMEs and non-MSMEs as well. Yeah, so the breakup I gave about 8 and 7 was on the non-MSME part. And many new products are being brought under the ambit of that PLI scheme, so that's all right. See, these are kickstart schemes essentially. They do have a certain shelf life, and a lot of other things have to come together for them to actually work. And of course, the other things that have to come together is like the national logistics pipeline has to actually, create the necessary logistics. Single window clearance should not just be a sort of a blah term, because like even in the ACC PLI for advanced cell chemistry, at the end there's a rider which says that all clearances etc. are vested in the awardee. So you get the picture, even though it's supposed to be single window clearance. So when the government says single window clearance, they basically mean single window clearance only for one A priority scheme. That's about it. A priority about just the A priority scheme they're talking about, not the whole host of other clearances that are required. And so on and so forth. And what else? Before I go to questions, maybe I'll make a couple of more brief points. And after that, I'll take your questions. So as I found out that in terms of investment, apparently the government has already got, proposals worth 2.34 lakh crores for, as a result of these PLI schemes spread across 14 PLI schemes. So they seem to be very, exuberant about that, but that has to translate on the ground level into actual investment. So that matters. Of course, that's a time-bound matter under these PLI schemes. Like for instance, in the case of ACC, it kicks in you have to invest, you have to complete, you have to start producing output from the new plant within 2 years of date of signing, and then of course the incentives will kick in for the next 5 years, subsequent to the commencement of production. One final point, of course, that in the case of the automotive sector, apparently it has already attracted proposals worth 67690 crores, as opposed to the expectation of 42,500 crores. So that's encouraging. But much more has to be done, and much more interface is required with domestic institutes and, of course, the academia. I'll give you an example. In another sector, in the there was this issue of suddenly the supply of steel refractory materials stopping from China. Now, as it turned out that the Bhubaneswar-based Institute of Mineral and Materials Technology had already patented the processes for that specific refractory material. But yet the Indian steel industry did not know about it. Now, of course, they are using that process and they've got their ancillaries to make it. So this is the sort of thing that needs to, there needs to be an omnibus organization that coordinates this sort of thing, because even in the case of defense, what I have found is often there is this question, who can build this in India? And then after a search, it turns out that it was already being built in India. It's just that the defense DPSU or the big private majors simply did not know about it. Get the picture? Okay, I'll go to questions now. Right, so, okay, Sagar Bhavsa is saying, why are we not deploying NAG on M4 and going for Spike? Okay, this is an IH question, so I'll have to skip this. A Nag says, hello Dada, hello to you as well. Omlan Vibhudatta says, what is your view on the incentive for electric vehicle FAME 2? Do you think electric vehicles should be included in priority sector lending? Well, it's a question there. Where do you want to see yourself? You've committed to this global zero target by 2070, and that's not going to be cheap. You know, all the projections that are out there ranging, which are with the cheapest of them being in the several trillion dollars. So, so I'm not surprised that such things are being done, but then there has to be an overarching move to ensure that if it is indeed included in private sector lending, that most of it leads to greater domestic value added on India, leads to greater domestic value added. And FAME 2 is obviously linked to this PLI for ACC and automotives. By the way, DHI under FAME 2, anybody receiving DHI under FAME 2 is in no way prejudiced from receiving PLI support as well. So that is also going on. So there's this whole issue of the same people getting reinforced incentives. So that needs to be looked at. That can be a strength, provided you are really stringent on the domestic value added requirements. Okay, Gaurav Chakraborty asks, China has managed to create smartphone companies like Huawei, Vivo, Oppo, but India couldn't produce one globally renowned company. Yeah, because you see, these things should have come earlier. China has really shepherded the rise of these companies, right? Now, of course, it is pulling in the other direction and wants to cut this or that to size. Not Huawei, that's still a favorite because that's totally linked to the PLA. But, and India couldn't produce because you didn't handhold properly. There was a time when we had the emergence of Videocon, BPL, etc. But none of these guys could break out, and companies that used to be in hardware went on moved to software. HCL is a great example, right? Even Wipro is an example. So there's something. So we need to change that. You need to become a country that wants to produce global manufacturing giants and integrated. And but PLI schemes apparently are aimed at producing national champions. Let's see what happens. Okay, Inagas. Won't this cater towards more chronism? I don't think I've seen any schemes specifically focused on MSMEs. Well, they are now going to introduce schemes focused on MSMEs. Of course, the telecom product scheme is focused on MSMEs. Half of it is, that is. And they are now for electronic components. They're going to move beyond specs and now have better schemes which are better targeted. But this chronism issue, of course, there can always be this issue of crony capitalism with any sort of industrial policy effort. But the focus has to be on domestic value added, on growing the supply chain. Look, ultimately, this world is a cold, dark place. And the model for becoming an economic superpower, unfortunately, is something that requires privileging certain conglomerates. It's another matter that in some countries the conglomerates just end up hollowing out the economy, and in others they actually build the supply chain, right? Whether it be China favoring very large state-owned champions, or whether it be the Japanese favoring the Zaibatsu and then the Keiretsu, or whether it be the Korean chaebol, or whether of course it be the great MNCs that America spawned. It has always been the case that the commanding heights of the quasi-capitalist economy ends up in the hands of a few organizations, conglomerates. Now it all depends on whether they are enlightened or not, and whether their agenda is dovetailed to national industrial policy or not. That is actually the main question over here. Okay, SB asks, PLI is being implemented in many sectors. Should we focus more on job-creating sectors like textile, electronics, toys, etc., and drop some of the low-producing, job-producing sectors? So, like I said, there are basically two parts to this whole PLI scheme. One is schemes, one set of schemes are aimed at creating strategic national capacity, or creating national capacity in key strategic industrial sectors. And the other is will have to be more employment-oriented. And now they're shifting towards the more employment-oriented, job-creating sectors. So electronics PLI already exists, obviously, And that was something that hit the ground running, because you already had a certain amount of electronics production happening in India, of course, with very low value added content, value addition levels. But now they're moving forward on that. And that is where they need to target the PLI better. We are targeted at the components, supply chain, etc. And these are the ones they are going to look at now. Just like I mentioned in my opening remarks, that electronics, toys, etc. Textile, of course, is a sector for which we already have PLI schemes. And there are two blocks over there. One is where you make an investment of 100 crores and you have to basically generate at least 200 crores of output, additional output. And the other is where you make an investment of 300 crores and show that you managed to generate 600 crores of additional output. So PLI schemes are there. PLI for man-made fabrics, basically man-made fiber-based fabrics, man-made fiber-based, sort of apparel and products related to technical textiles. Those are all under the purview of the PLI scheme for textiles. Man-made fiber, of course, you have both synthetic and cellulosic. Those are the two types anyway of man-made fiber. So you have that under the purview of that PLI scheme. Okay. ENAG is asking, and of course they are going to announce new PLIs for toys, etc., and bicycles also. ENAG, even after announcing PLI for semiconductors, the DLI for semiconductors and MIT, and policies for semiconductor companies, we are still not seeing any big item semiconductor company setting up here apart from Vedanta. Well, Vedanta is going to set up the 28 nanometer unit, and I think, and they're getting PSMC, which is of course one of the top three, although not, it's third by a by a long margin of Taiwan. So I think we'll see one or two more large semi-fabs coming in. But again, if you look at these semi-fabs, the critical materials will all be imported. The machines will obviously be imported. The software running those machines will be imported. The design software is also imported, right? We'll only be providing semiconductor grade water and power over here. And of course, we'll provide manpower. That we'll manage to do. The designs, of course, India is a great design hub for semiconductors. So some of Indian designs will be built in these plants. But we have to indigenize this critical supply chain. We can't be dependent for semiconductor grade neon elsewhere, or even xylene, which of course is produced in India now, but in not any great quantity. And of course there are a whole host of then semiconductor grade, even hydrochloric acid and stuff like that. Those can be totally done in India, and that has to be, we have to move quickly on that, dyes, etc. Okay, so what are these companies looking for? What are we lacking? I think I already outlined some of the things that they are looking for. They're looking for a deeper supply chain. They're looking for semiconductor grade water and power. They're looking for skilled labor. Okay, Aditya Prakash. Hi, Saurav. Which sector are you? Okay, let's see. Okay, where's that question? Hi Saurav, which sector are you most hopeful about with regard to PLI? Also read an article recently that Vietnam is still getting a lot of major capital leaving China. Any views on that? Not surprising. You see, if you see the distance between the Hanoi industrial parks and Guangzhou, you'll understand why a lot of that is just leaving China. You see, Vietnam is now just a downstream, is just a downstream player of China's extended supply chain, which spans all of East Asia. That is one manufacturing region. So I'm not surprising that initially a lot of that has been moved over there. But sooner than later, people will realize that Vietnam cannot produce the kind of scale that people need, and nor is it really distant. You really do not reduce geopolitical risk by just moving to Vietnam. You have to move to some other geography. So that is going to happen. Which sector I am hopeful with regards to PLI? Automotive components, even this advanced cell chemistry, despite, only 3 and now of course 4 being selected, more will be brought in. Textiles, although there has to be a greater focus on the supply chain there as well. By the way, the textile PLI was also has an added incentive of 0% duty on imported cotton, right? So there's always this tension between cotton growers and yarn makers, and of course textile players in India. So the government has sort of leaned in favor of textile manufacturers here, okay, by putting in that added incentive. Electronics, of course, but then we have to focus on components. Okay, Omlan Bibhudatta, nowadays green H2 has become a buzzword. Does it actually have potential? It's just another of these big terms. Well, there's somebody that I know who's involved in this, who's of the view that we have to move to blue hydrogen first before we move to green hydrogen. But this will be one whole discussion, and maybe we can do a program just on this, the prospects for green hydrogen perhaps. And we'll have charts and graphs and all. This is a Diwali episode, so I've kept it light. I'll just answer your questions IAH style here. Okay, ANAG. PLI is still very much focused on capital intensive goods like semiconductors, vehicles, and electronics. I don't think this solves the issue of unemployment until we focus on labor intensive work. Yeah, so we discussed this, right? So they now want to move towards, they now want to lean towards more employment creating sectors, where also the supply chain is more domestic anyway. Okay, so we are going to see that. Suyansh Chaudhary. How to break China in solar panel industry and its ecosystem? No matter how much you indigenize solar energy, but you however rely on China, how can we create the same ecosystem? You have to focus on design. You have to focus on creating national standards. That's how you will break them. There's no doubt about that. Gaurav Chakraborty, why Raghuram Rajan keeps on saying should focus on service sector? He has his views. I don't agree with them. Let's move on. Omlan Bibhudatta asks, at ENAG, he has a comment for ENAG, which I'm sure ENAG will see. Devdi Mukherjee asks, what is your opinion on Indian semiconductor policy? West already put an embargo on us, 14 nanometer and less chips. Actually, it's 28 nanometer and less, not 14. How can India break this? Good question. Effects of one China policy on India-Taiwan collaboration. There's your answer. We have to break it using Taiwan. And we might be able to do it because of the way geopolitics is moving, but we have to be a little brave. You cannot have this, oh no, let's keep doing dhanda with China and let's not really go that way. If Taiwan is willing to help us on the strategic industrial front, we must give them the support they need. That is my view. Okay. Enag is asking, it is now quite shameful that Bangladesh now has a higher GDP per capita than us and higher growth than us. According to IF latest estimate, they managed to do that by focusing labor intensive. Yeah, well, they may not. Given the way they are sliding, this may change. But yes, they've definitely done quite well. But their growth model is sputtering now because they haven't been able to move on. This is why you need to climb. And you see, what has happened is that old form of, first I'll go to the labor intensive, then I'll move to the more capital intensive industries, etc. That luxury is no longer there because of the way the world has become now. Things have accelerated. And one is complementary to the other. You will need industrial 4.0 tech in the textile industry also. So you need to now, so the job for India is much more difficult. And in any case, given the way India is, where it produces so many lakh engineers more than anyone else, has this great space program, defense programs, etc., its comparative advantages are not exactly where Bangladesh's or Vietnam's comparative advantages are. They may lie in other domains as well, right? And a much less of an effort may be required to create a comparative advantage in some more high-tech domain than may be required in some apparently lesser tech domain. Then again, there's the question of spatial variation. You see, these textile policies and your textile industrial policies should be aimed at Eastern India, right? Which is where you will have the labor advantage and you will be able to outcompete Bangladesh in its own at its own game essentially, and you'll have better infrastructure also soon once the DFCs and the other industrial corridors and the ports are made. So there has to be a spatial variation initially. I mean, for instance, Bihar and company had to fight really hard to get that one Citra park, the textile park located over there. Bihar's future lies, at least the immediate future, that is, lies in textiles, lies in agro-processing, lies in railway-based industries, lies in fertilizer, lies in agro implements. You have to focus there. So you have to go on a region by region basis. Of course, Bengal can do well even in electronics and even in things like drones and all. So that is there as well. Okay. Right. So Enag and Amlan Bibhudatta are fighting with each other. So let me leave that aside. Aditya Prakash, hi, I read your book on nuclear energy recently. How well do the numbers and economics of nuclear energy stack up after a decade? Since you wrote your book, how hopeful are you about nuclear energy in India? This is a whole new book actually. I'll have to update this book, and especially that chapter on the economics of nuclear power. But the one thing remains the same. Nuclear power has very low marginal costs, but it is very capital intensive. Okay, so standardization and is absolute sine qua non if you want a large nuclear build-up. You cannot have variations because that will just increase costs, and of course that will lead to delays, which will lead to further increases in costs. And they are best built in a low interest rate environment, which the world was in for 10 years. But the best time to build the sort of nuclear plants were lost because of the Fukushima effect. Okay, Devdi Mukherjee asks, what about Indian research on future battery chemistry like aluminium ion, zinc ion, and comparison with this battery chemistry, with lithium ion battery chemistry? Okay, this is a long subject. I'm obviously not a energy storage specialist or a cell chemistry specialist, but yeah, the work on all these areas is going on. But as of now, nothing matches obviously the energy density of lithium ions. Okay. Kavita Rajkumarias, will laptop price go down? Yes, actually it will. All right, last two questions. Devdi Mukherjee, Dada, what's your opinion regarding some noise regarding decoupling of India's economy with petrodollar? Opinion regarding BRICS gold-based trade? It won't happen. In fact, we are not going to decouple from the dollar just like that. You see, it's like this. If you want to internationalize your currency, you need to liberalize your capital account. We are not in a position to do that. Secondly, we are not going to join hands with somebody else who cannot match the liquidity or the stability of the dollar. Okay, just not going to happen. And the other thing is, yes, we will increase payments and settlements in bilateral currencies and all that, and eventually that will lead to an increase in reserve holdings of the rupee in various central banks, but it will be a much more indirect and slow process. We have to grow much more, and the world has to change a little bit and our own position it before we start trying to internationalize the rupee. Last question, Plasmodium Vivax. What are the reasons for not having a local heavy machinery brand likes of Caterpillar, Komatsu, JCB, Kawasaki in India? We had, L&T is a heavy engineering brand, which is there and is growing. JCB, of course, will say that it's now becoming a more of an Indian company with its component chain also growing inside India. In fact, that is a strategic decision taken by England's JCB. Heavy Engineering Corporation was supposed to be our was supposed to be our hat in the ring. But we never nurtured it because, India falls between two stools. At one time, socialists, these are the temples of modern India, they will occupy the commanding heights. So you sort of created all kinds of issues for the private sector to grow and basically disincentivized growth. Then under the garb of liberalization, you basically started saying, oh, we won't support PSUs anymore. These guys are going to do it for us. And at the end of the day, you have a cat, you have a mouse that does not, you have a cat that does not actually catch mice. Okay. Whereas in China, they're very clear. It does not matter what the color of the cat is, as long as it catches mice. So we have to be clear about that. Okay. On that note, I'm sort of truncating this somewhat, short session on Modi's PLI schemes. I might come back on the same, I might come back to you with another sort of episode on the same topic, which will have more charts, bars, graphs, etc. Basically more boring. But anyway, maybe some of you will like that. So all right then, happy Diwali to all of you. Stay safe. Jai Hind.